A wicked son tries to attack his paralyzed father, but then the furious horse appears and does the unimaginable. The sun rose lazily over the hills of Oakville, Tennessee, painting the sky in warm, golden hues. Frank Thompson, a man with a weathered face and tired eyes, watched the dawn from the porch of his modest house on the outskirts of town. The morning silence was only interrupted by the soft whisper of wind through the trees and the occasional crow of a rooster in the distance. It had been 2 years since the passing of Sarah, his beloved wife, and her absence still weighed on his heart like a stone. Every corner of the house held memories of her melodious laughter, the scent of her perfume, the warmth of her presence. Frank sighed deeply, rubbing his stubbly chin as he mentally prepared himself to face a new day. Inside the house, he heard the first movements of his children. Lisa, the eldest at 22, would already be preparing breakfast with the dedication and affection that characterized her. Mike, the youngest at 18, was probably still asleep, recovering from another night of partying. Frank frowned as he thought of his son. Since Sarah's passing, the boy seemed to have lost his way, giving in to a life of excess that deeply worried his father. With a final glance at the horizon, Frank entered the house. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm biscuits filled the kitchen. Lisa, her long dark hair tied back in a braid, moved gracefully between the stove and the table. "Good morning, Dad," she greeted with a warm smile, so similar to her mother's that for a moment Frank felt a lump in his throat. "Good morning, sweetheart," he replied, sitting at the table. "Your brother?" Lisa rolled her eyes, a gesture that mixed exasperation and concern. "Still asleep. He came in late last night smelling of whiskey and cigarettes." Frank nodded silently, chewing his breakfast thoughtfully. Mike's behavior was a recurring topic of discussion between them, a constant source of anguish that seemed to grow with each passing day. After breakfast, with Mike still absent, Frank decided to take a walk around the property. He needed to clear his mind, to push away the worries that plagued him for a moment. He said goodbye to Lisa with a kiss on the forehead and set off on his walk along the path that wound between the nearby fields and hills. The fresh morning air and exercise began to take effect, lightening the weight he felt on his shoulders. The sun's rays gently warmed his skin, and the scent of earth and wildflowers filled his lungs. For a moment, Frank allowed himself to enjoy the simple beauty of the landscape, remembering the walks he used to take with Sarah on days like this. It was then that he saw it. In a small clearing, partially hidden by some bushes, lay a horse. The animal, with beautiful chestnut fur, seemed to be in trouble. As he cautiously approached, Frank noticed that the horse had one of its hind legs visibly injured and was struggling to get up. Frank's heart clenched at the sight of the noble animal suffering. Without thinking twice, he approached slowly, speaking in a low and soft voice so as not to frighten it. "Easy, friend," he murmured, extending a hand towards the horse. "I'm not going to hurt you." The animal whinnied softly, its large dark eyes fixed on Frank with a mixture of fear and hope. With slow and careful movements, Frank examined the wound. It didn't seem to be a fracture, but the cut was deep and would need attention. "We're going to help you," Frank said, more to himself than to the horse. "I can't leave you here like this." Gently, he began to stroke the animal's neck, gradually earning its trust. The horse, although still nervous, seemed to relax under his touch. Frank stayed there next to the injured animal, losing track of time as he thought about how he could help it. The decision to bring the horse home wasn't easy. Frank knew that caring for an injured animal would require time, resources, and energy that were already scarce in his life. However, something in the horse's eyes, a spark of life and determination, touched a chord within him that he thought had been dormant for a long time. With care and patience, Frank managed to get the horse to stand up. The animal limped visibly, but seemed willing to follow him. Step by step, with Frank gently guiding it, they set off on the way back to the house. The journey was slow and arduous. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and sweat soaked Frank's shirt. However, every time he looked at the horse, which was bravely struggling to move forward despite the pain, he felt his strength renewed. When they finally reached the house, Lisa came running out, her eyes wide with surprise. "Dad, where?" "I found her injured in the field," Frank explained, panting from the effort. "I couldn't leave her there." Lisa, quickly overcoming her initial astonishment, nodded with determination. "I'll get water and bandages. We'll take her to the barn." While Lisa ran to get what was needed, Frank guided the horse towards the old barn next to the house. The animal, exhausted from the effort, collapsed onto the fresh straw that covered the floor. Frank knelt next to the horse, tenderly stroking its neck. "Easy, friend, you're safe now. We're going to take care of you." At that moment, looking into the animal's eyes, Frank felt something change within him, a spark of purpose, of connection that he hadn't felt in a long time. Without knowing it, this unexpected encounter was about to change the course of his life and that of his family in ways he could never have imagined. The days following the horse's rescue brought a new routine to the Thompson family's life. Frank, with Lisa's help, devoted himself body and soul to caring for the injured animal. The barn became an improvised stable, and the scent of fresh hay and medicinal ointments filled the air. Frank spent hours with the horse, cleaning its wound, changing bandages, and making sure it ate and drank enough. With each passing day, a silent but powerful bond was forged between the man and the animal. "I'm going to call her Hope," Frank said one afternoon, while stroking the horse's neck. Lisa, who was helping to change the water, smiled at the choice of name. "It's perfect, Dad," she replied, observing how her father's eyes shone with a light she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope's presence seemed to have awakened something in Frank. His step had become lighter, his face more animated. He even began to hum old songs while working, something he hadn't done since Sarah's passing. However, not everything was harmony in the Thompson house. Mike, the younger son, showed a total disinterest in the new resident. More so, he seemed annoyed by the attention his father devoted to the animal. "Don't you think you're overdoing it, Dad?" Mike snapped one morning, appearing in the barn with bloodshot eyes and messy hair. "It's just a horse." Frank, who was changing Hope's bandage, looked up with a mixture of surprise and disappointment. "It's not just a horse, Mike. It's a living being that needs our help." Mike snorted, shaking his head. "Whatever you say, I'm going into town." Before Frank could say anything else, Mike had already turned around and was walking away with long strides. Hope whinnied softly, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Easy, beautiful," Frank murmured, stroking the animal's muzzle. "He'll come around." But deep down, Frank knew that the problem with Mike went beyond a simple disagreement about the horse. Since Sarah's passing, his son had been drifting further and further away, immersing himself in a world of parties and dubious friendships that Frank couldn't understand. Lisa, always attentive, noticed the concern in her father's eyes. One afternoon, while helping Frank exercise Hope's injured leg, she decided to address the issue. "Dad," she began cautiously, "have you thought about talking to Mike? Maybe if you explain how important Hope is to you." Frank sighed deeply, his hands stopping on the horse's back. "I've tried, sweetheart, but your brother, it's like talking to a wall. He doesn't want to listen." Lisa nodded, understanding her father's frustration. "Don't give up on him, Dad. Maybe he just needs time." Frank smiled weakly, grateful for his daughter's wisdom and compassion. "You're right. I won't give up. Not on Mike, and not on Hope." As the weeks passed, Hope's improvement was evident. The wound on her leg had almost completely healed, and the animal was beginning to move with more ease. Frank, following the advice of the local veterinarian, began taking Hope on short walks around the house. These walks quickly became Frank's favorite part of the day. Walking alongside Hope, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The slow rhythm of their steps, the soft snort of the horse, the crunch of leaves under their feet, everything combined to create a symphony of tranquility that calmed his soul. One afternoon, as they were returning from one of these walks, Frank was surprised to see Mike waiting for them on the porch of the house. His younger son was rarely home at that hour, and even less often seemed to be waiting for him. "Mike," Frank greeted, a mixture of surprise and hope in his voice. "Is something wrong?" Mike shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his father's gaze. "I wanted to talk to you." Frank nodded, feeling his heart race. Could this be the moment of reconciliation he had been hoping for? Carefully, he tied Hope to a nearby post and approached his son. "I'm listening," he said softly, resisting the urge to put a hand on Mike's shoulder. Mike took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I need money," he finally blurted out. "I have some debts to pay." The hope in Frank's heart deflated like a punctured balloon. "Mike, son, what have you gotten yourself into?" "It's nothing, Dad," Mike replied defensively. "Just, can you lend me the money or not?" Frank closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of worry settle on his shoulders again. You know we don't have much, Mike. Hope's treatment. It's always about that damn horse, Mike exploded. Is it more important to you than your own son? Mike's words hit Frank like a punch to the stomach. Before he could respond, Hope whinnied loudly, as if wanting to intervene in the argument. It's not about that, Mike, Frank began, struggling to stay calm. Hope needed our help and— I need your help, Mike interrupted. But of course you prefer to spend money on an animal rather than your son. Without waiting for a response, Mike turned around and walked away with long strides, leaving Frank with words stuck in his throat and a heavy heart. Frank stood there, motionless, watching his son disappear into the distance. He felt a mixture of frustration, pain, and a deep sense of failure. How had they come to this point? At what moment had he lost the connection with his son? Hope slowly approached, gently pushing Frank's shoulder with her muzzle. The gesture, so simple and affectionate, brought tears to Frank's eyes. "Oh, Hope," he murmured, hugging the animal's neck. "What am I going to do?" At that moment, Lisa came out of the house, alerted by the shouting. Seeing her father embracing Hope, with slumped shoulders and a lost gaze, she ran towards him. "Dad, what happened? Where's Mike?" Frank looked up, meeting his daughter's concerned eyes. "Your brother. He needs help, Lisa, and I don't know how to give it to him." Lisa hugged her father, offering silent comfort. Together, with Hope by their side, they stayed there, contemplating the sunset that painted the sky of Oakville in shades of red and gold. Night fell on the Thompson family, bringing with it a mixture of uncertainty and determination. Frank knew that the challenges they faced were great, but as he stroked Hope's neck and felt Lisa's embrace, he also knew that he wasn't alone in this struggle. The unexpected bond with Hope had brought light to his life, but it had also illuminated the cracks in his family. Now more than ever, Frank was determined to heal those wounds, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. Dawn arrived with a cool breeze that crept through the windows of the Thompson house. Frank, as had been his custom since Hope's arrival, got up early to tend to the horse. However, this morning his steps were heavier, laden with worry over the argument with Mike the previous afternoon. As he opened the barn door, Frank was surprised to find Lisa already there, gently brushing Hope's coat. "Good morning, Dad," she greeted with a warm smile. "I thought I'd get a head start today." Frank felt a wave of gratitude towards his daughter. "Thank you, sweetheart. I don't know what I'd do without you." As they worked together, feeding and caring for Hope, Lisa decided to address the issue she knew was weighing on her father's mind. "Dad, about Mike," she began cautiously. Frank sighed deeply. "I'm worried, Lisa. Your brother seems to be getting into bigger and bigger trouble." Lisa nodded, sharing her father's concern. Maybe we should seek help. Someone who can talk to him, a counselor perhaps." The suggestion made Frank pause, considering the idea. It could be a good option, but knowing your brother, I don't think he'll easily accept it. "We could try," Lisa insisted, "for the sake of the family." Frank nodded, grateful for his daughter's sensibility. "We'll do it. We'll find a way to help Mike." As they finished the morning chores with Hope, Frank couldn't help but think of Sarah. What would she have done in this situation? His wife had always had a special gift for handling family crises, a skill he felt he lacked. With a final glance at Hope, Frank and Lisa headed to the house to prepare breakfast. Mike's absence at the table was noticeable, a silent reminder of the gap that had opened in the family. As they ate, Lisa decided to share an idea that had been on her mind. "Dad, I was thinking, what if we organized a family day? Like we used to do when Mom was with us. We could go for a picnic, take Hope." The proposal took Frank by surprise. It had been years since they had done family activities, not since Sarah's passing. The idea brought with it a mixture of nostalgia and hope. "It's an excellent idea, Lisa," he responded with a genuine smile. "I think it would do us all good." Determined to put the plan into action, Frank and Lisa began to prepare everything for the family picnic. Frank took care of getting Hope ready for the outing, while Lisa prepared the food and packed a blanket. The biggest challenge would be convincing Mike to join them. Frank, gathering his courage, headed to his son's room. He knocked softly on the door. "Mike, son, are you awake?" A grunt from inside was the only response. Frank slowly opened the door, finding Mike still in bed, his face buried in the pillow. "Mike, Lisa and I are planning a family picnic. We'd like you to come with us." Mike turned, looking at his father with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "A picnic? Seriously, Dad?" "Yes, son, like we used to do before." It'll be good for all of us to spend time together. For a moment, Frank thought he saw a flash of interest in Mike's eyes, a memory of happier times, but as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. I don't know, Dad. I have plans. Frank felt his heart sink, but he stood firm. Please, Mike, it's important to me, to all of us. After what seemed like an eternity, Mike finally nodded. All right, I'll go. With a slightly lighter heart, Frank left the room, hoping that this day could be the beginning of a positive change for his family. A few hours later, the Thompsons found themselves in a beautiful meadow on the outskirts of Oakville. Hope grazed peacefully nearby, while Frank spread the blanket under the shade of a large tree. The atmosphere was charged with tense expectation. Mike kept somewhat apart, his hands in his pockets and an expression of discomfort on his face. Lisa, for her part, was trying to maintain light conversation, attempting to include her brother. "Remember when we used to come here as kids?" Lisa commented as she served the lemonade. "Mom always insisted we bring enough food to feed an army." The mention of Sarah brought a mixture of nostalgic smiles and melancholic looks. Frank felt a lump in his throat, but he made an effort to keep the mood positive. "Your mother always said that fresh air awakened the appetite," he added, looking at his children with affection. To everyone's surprise, it was Mike who continued the conversation. "I remember once we brought a chocolate cake, and it completely melted before we could eat it." The anecdote provoked genuine laughter, breaking some of the tension. For a moment, it seemed they had gone back in time to a simpler and happier era. As they ate and shared memories, Frank noticed how Mike occasionally looked at Hope with curiosity. On an impulse, he decided to seize the opportunity. "Mike, do you want to come closer to Hope? She's very gentle, she won't hurt you." Mike hesitated for a moment, but finally stood up and walked towards the horse. Frank followed him, placing a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "Extend your hand slowly," Frank instructed. "Let her smell you first." Cautiously, Mike followed his father's instructions. Hope approached, sniffing Mike's extended hand. After a moment, the horse gently pushed his hand with her muzzle, as if asking for a caress. An involuntary smile appeared on Mike's face as he stroked Hope's neck. She's beautiful," he admitted quietly. Frank felt his heart fill with hope. This small moment of connection between his son and Hope seemed like a step in the right direction. However, the moment of peace was ephemeral. The sound of a phone broke the atmosphere. Mike quickly pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, his expression changing as he looked at the screen. "I have to go," he announced abruptly, moving away from Hope and heading towards his things. "But Mike, we just got here," Lisa protested. "Can't you stay a little longer?" "I'm sorry, it's important," Mike replied, avoiding looking his family in the eyes. Frank, feeling the moment slipping away from them, tried to intervene. "Son, please, we can talk about whatever is worrying you. We're family." Mike stopped for an instant, as if considering his father's words, but then he shook his head. "You wouldn't understand, Dad. None of you would understand." And with those words, Mike quickly walked away, leaving Frank and Lisa watching him with a mixture of sadness and concern. Hope whinnied softly, as if sensing the sadness that had fallen over the family. Frank approached the horse, stroking her neck as he tried to process what had just happened. "Don't give up, Dad," Lisa said, approaching her father and taking his hand. "Mike needs us, even if he won't admit it." Frank nodded, grateful for his daughter's strength. "You're right, sweetheart. We won't give up on your brother." As they packed things up to return home, Frank couldn't help but feel they were on the edge of something important. The shadows of the past continued to cast themselves over them, but there were also glimmers of light, moments of connection that gave him hope. Mounting Hope for the return journey, with Lisa walking beside him, Frank promised himself that he would find a way to heal his family, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The days following the failed family picnic passed in tense calm at the Thompson house. Frank divided his time between caring for Hope and his attempts to get closer to Mike, who seemed increasingly distant and evasive. One morning, as Frank was performing his usual tasks in the stable, he noticed that Hope seemed restless, whinnying softly and moving her head from side to side. "What's wrong, beautiful?" Frank murmured, stroking the animal's neck. "Are you feeling sick?" As if answering his question, Hope took a step forward and stumbled, almost falling. Alarmed, Frank quickly examined the horse's legs, noticing a slight swelling in the one that had been injured. "Lisa!" Frank called, his voice tinged with worry. "Come quick!" Lisa appeared at the barn door, her eyes wide open at seeing her father's expression. "What's happening, Dad?" "Hope doesn't look well," Frank explained. "We need to call the vet immediately." While Lisa ran to make the call, Frank stayed with Hope, speaking softly to her and trying to keep her calm. He couldn't help but feel a pang of fear. Hope had become an important part of his life, a symbol of hope and renewal. The idea that something might happen to her was unbearable. The veterinarian, Dr. Johnson, arrived an hour later. After examining Hope, his face turned serious. "Frank," he began, taking off his gloves, "I'm afraid the situation is more complicated than we thought. The original wound hasn't healed completely and has become infected. She'll need intensive treatment and possibly surgery." The veterinarian's words fell like a weight on Frank. "But she'll be okay, right?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Johnson put a hand on Frank's shoulder. "With proper treatment, she has good chances. But I must warn you, it will be costly." Frank closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. Money was already scarce in the Thompson family, and costly treatment for Hope would mean even more financial difficulties. But looking into the animal's eyes, Frank knew he couldn't abandon her. "We'll do whatever is necessary," he finally declared. "Hope is part of our family now." Lisa, who had been listening silently, approached her father and hugged him. "We'll find a way, Dad," she said with determination. While Dr. Johnson prepared Hope to take her to the veterinary clinic, Frank and Lisa discussed how they could gather the money needed for the treatment. "I can look for a part-time job," Lisa offered, "and maybe we could sell some things we don't use anymore." Frank nodded, grateful for his daughter's support. "I'll talk to Mr. Wilson at the hardware store. Maybe he can give me more work hours." At that moment, Mike appeared at the entrance of the barn, his face a mixture of curiosity and concern. "What's going on? Why is the vet here?" Frank and Lisa exchanged a surprised look before Frank responded. "Hope is sick, son. She needs special treatment." To everyone's surprise, Mike approached Hope, gently stroking her muzzle. "Will she be okay?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been in months. "We hope so," Frank replied, moved by his son's show of concern. "But the treatment will be expensive." Mike remained silent for a moment, his hand still on Hope's neck. Then, as if he had made a sudden decision, he turned to his father. "I have some money saved. It's not much, but maybe it can help." Frank felt his eyes fill with tears. This unexpected gesture from Mike, this moment of connection with Hope and with the family, was more than he had dared to hope for. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "It means a lot to me, to all of us." As Dr. Johnson prepared to take Hope away, the Thompson family came together in a group hug, an image that hadn't been seen in a long time. It was as if Hope's illness had acted as a catalyst, reviving the family bonds that had weakened. "I'll be back tomorrow with news," Dr. Johnson promised as he loaded Hope into his trailer. "Meanwhile, try to rest. Hope is in good hands." That night, dinner at the Thompson house was different. For the first time in months, Mike sat at the table without having to be called repeatedly. The conversation flowed more naturally, centered on Hope and plans to gather the money needed for her treatment. "We could organize a garage sale," Lisa suggested. "I'm sure the neighbors would help if we tell them about Hope." "That's a good idea," Frank nodded. "And maybe we could make some crafts to sell at the Sunday market." Mike, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "I know someone who could give us temporary work at his mechanic shop. If you want, I can ask tomorrow." Frank and Lisa looked at Mike with surprise and gratitude. This small offering was a big step towards family reconciliation. "That would be wonderful, son," Frank said, his voice full of pride and hope. As they cleared the table after dinner, Frank couldn't help but think about how Hope's arrival had changed their lives. What began as an act of compassion towards an injured animal had become a force that was uniting his family again. That night, before going to bed, Frank stopped in front of the photo of Sarah that he kept on his bedside table. "I wish you were here to see this, my love," he whispered, gently touching the frame. "I think you'd be proud." The next morning, Frank woke to the sound of activity in the house. As he left his room, he found Mike and Lisa in the kitchen, preparing breakfast together, something that hadn't happened in years. "Good morning, Dad," they greeted in unison, their faces showing a mixture of determination and hope. "Good morning," Frank replied, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Ready to start the day?" The three nodded, knowing they had a long road ahead, but feeling more united than ever. As they ate breakfast, they made plans for the day. Lisa would organize the garage sale, Mike would go talk to his contact at the mechanic shop, and Frank would head to the veterinary clinic to see Hope and talk to Dr. Johnson about the treatment. When Frank left the house that morning, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Hope's illness, although worrying, had brought with it an unexpected gift, the opportunity to heal the wounds in his family and start anew. As he walked towards the veterinary clinic, Frank allowed himself to feel hope. Hope for Hope's recovery, hope for reconciliation with Mike, hope for a future in which his family would be united and strong again. The road wouldn't be easy, but Frank knew that together they could overcome any obstacle. With each step he took, he felt he was getting closer not only to hope, but also to a new chapter in the Thompson family's life, a chapter full of possibilities and renewal. The sun had barely begun to peek over the hills of Oakville when Frank arrived at the veterinary clinic. His heart was beating hard, anxious to receive news about Hope's condition. Dr. Johnson greeted him with a tired but encouraging smile. "Good morning, Frank. Hope had a quiet night. The surgery was successful, but we still have a long road ahead." Frank let out a sigh of relief. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice laden with emotion. The veterinarian nodded and guided him to the clinic's stable. There, in a spacious stall, lay Hope. The horse raised its head upon seeing Frank, whinnying softly in recognition. "Hello, beautiful," Frank murmured, approaching to stroke Hope's neck. "How are you feeling?" While Frank comforted Hope, Dr. Johnson explained the details of the treatment. "She'll need daily medications, bandage changes, and physical therapy. It will be a long and costly process, Frank. Are you sure you can handle it?" Frank looked into Hope's eyes, seeing in them the same determination he felt in his heart. "We'll find a way, Dr. Johnson. This mare has united my family in a way I didn't think possible. We won't abandon her now." After spending some time with Hope and receiving detailed instructions from Dr. Johnson, Frank headed home, his mind full of plans and worries. Upon arriving, he was surprised to see the front yard full of items tagged with prices. Lisa was moving from side to side, organizing everything for the garage sale. "Dad!" she exclaimed upon seeing him. "How's Hope?" Frank told her about the surgery and the long recovery process that awaited them. Lisa listened attentively, nodding with determination. "Don't worry, Dad. This sale will help us. And look, the neighbors have been bringing things to sell too. Everyone wants to help Hope." Frank felt a wave of gratitude towards his community. In moments like this, he remembered why he loved living in Oakville so much. At that moment, Mike appeared at the entrance, looking tired but satisfied. "Dad, I talked to Mr. Peterson at the shop. He says he can give all three of us work if we want. It's not much, but it'll help with Hope's expenses." Frank couldn't contain the tears that formed in his eyes. Seeing his children working together, united by a common purpose, was more than he had dared to hope for just a few days ago. "Thank you, children," he said, hugging them both. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The following days were a whirlwind of activity for the Thompson family. Between the garage sale, work at Mr. Peterson's shop, and daily visits to Hope, they barely had time to rest. But instead of feeling exhausted, they seemed revitalized by this new shared purpose. One afternoon, as Frank and Mike worked together in the shop, Mike finally opened up about what had been happening in his life. "Dad," he began, his voice trembling, "I'm sorry, I know I've been a pain lately. It's just that since Mom left, I felt like everything was falling apart. I didn't know how to handle it." Frank put down his tools and looked at his son, seeing in his eyes the pain he had been hiding for so long. "Oh, Mike, I've felt it too. Losing your mother was the hardest thing we've faced as a family, but we're in this together, son, always." Mike nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "I know that now, Dad. Seeing how everyone came together for Hope, it made me realize how foolish I've been. I need you, I need all of you." Father and son embraced, years of pain and misunderstandings dissolving in that simple gesture of love and forgiveness. Meanwhile, at home, Lisa had been busy researching horse recovery and alternative therapies. One afternoon, while reviewing her notes, she had an idea. "Dad, Mike," she called excitedly when they returned from the shop. "I think I have an idea that could help Hope and maybe even generate some extra income." Frank and Mike looked at her curiously as Lisa explained her plan. "I've been reading about equine therapy," she began. "It's a type of therapy that uses horses to help people with different disabilities. What do you think if once Hope recovers, we train her for this? We could offer equine therapy sessions right here, on our property. The idea took Frank by surprise. He had never considered using their land in that way. But Lisa, do you think Hope would be ready for something like that? And we don't know anything about equine therapy. Lisa smiled, her enthusiasm contagious. We can learn, Dad. I've found some online courses we could take. And Dr. Johnson said Hope's rehabilitation would include a lot of gentle exercise. This could be perfect for her. Mike, who had been listening attentively, added, and I could help build the necessary facilities. With what I've learned at the shop, I think I could do a good job. Frank looked at his children, feeling a mixture of pride and amazement. In just a few weeks, they had gone from being a fractured family to a united team, working together towards a better future. All right, he finally said, let's do it. But first, let's focus on Hope recovering completely. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Hope's recovery was slow but steady. Each small progress was celebrated by the Thompson family as a great victory. During this time, the house filled with books on equine therapy, plans for the new facilities, and animated conversations about the future. Frank, Mike, and Lisa spent nights studying together, learning everything they could about how to help people through connection with horses. One sunny afternoon, almost 6 months after Hope's surgery, Dr. Johnson gave the news they had all been waiting for. Hope was ready to return home. The day Hope set foot again on the Thompson ranch was a day of celebration. Neighbors gathered to welcome the mare that, unknowingly, had been the catalyst for so many positive changes in the community. As Hope trotted gently through the meadow with Frank walking beside her, Mike and Lisa watched from the fence, their faces radiant with joy. Who would have thought, Mike reflected, that an injured horse could change our lives so much? Lisa smiled, resting her head on her brother's shoulder. I think Hope was exactly what our family needed. She reminded us of what's really important. Frank joined his children, putting an arm around each of them. Together they watched Hope grazing peacefully, her coat shining under the afternoon sun. Thank you, Frank said softly, for not giving up, on our family or on Hope. The three stayed there, united, watching as the sun began to set over Oakville. The future, with its plans for equine therapy and new beginnings, stretched out before them, full of promises and possibilities. And at the center of it all was Hope, the living symbol that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a new dawn. Dawn painted the sky of Oakville, Tennessee, with pink and golden hues as Frank stepped out onto the back patio of his house. The crisp morning air carried with it the promise of a new day full of possibilities. In the distance, in the meadow, Hope grazed peacefully, her slender figure silhouetted against the horizon. Frank smiled, remembering how much his life had changed in recent months. Lisa's idea of turning their ranch into an equine therapy center had given a new purpose to the entire family. Since Hope's return, they had worked tirelessly to make that dream a reality. Good morning, Dad. Mike's voice pulled him from his thoughts. His son came out to the patio, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. Frank gratefully accepted the cup. Good morning, son. Ready for the big day? Mike nodded, his face a mixture of nervousness and excitement. I can't believe we're finally opening the center. Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming. Me too, Frank admitted, putting a hand on his son's shoulder. But it's real, Mike, and it's thanks to you and your sister. As father and son shared that quiet moment, Lisa came out of the house loaded with papers and with her phone glued to her ear. Yes, Doctor. Johnson, everything's ready for the final inspection, she was saying as she approached them. We'll expect you in an hour. She hung up the phone and looked at her father and brother with a radiant smile. Good morning, family. Are you ready to change lives? The three shared a nervous but expectant laugh. The day they had been waiting for had finally arrived, the official opening of the Hope Equine Therapy Center. The following hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Johnson arrived for the final inspection, giving his approval with a proud smile. Neighbors began to arrive, offering help and well wishes. The yard filled with the aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread, courtesy of Mrs. Wilson, the neighbor who had been a constant support throughout the process. Mid-morning, the first group of visitors arrived, families with children with various disabilities, all with eyes full of hope and curiosity. Frank, Mike, and Lisa welcomed them warmly. guiding them through the new facilities. "Welcome to the Hope Equine Therapy Center," Frank began, his voice full of emotion. "A few months ago, our family was going through difficult times, but thanks to a very special mayor, we discovered a new way to heal and grow together. Today, we want to share that experience with all of you." Lisa took over, explaining the benefits of equine therapy and how the sessions would work. Mike, for his part, took charge of showing the facilities he had built with his own hands: the adapted stables, the training track, and the therapy room. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Hope, brushed and gleaming, was led to the training track. The children looked at her in awe, some with a little fear, others with barely contained enthusiasm. "Who wants to be the first to meet Hope?" Lisa asked with an encouraging smile. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, stepped forward. Seated in her wheelchair, she looked at Hope with a mixture of fascination and nervousness. "My name is Emily," she said in a shy voice. "Can I pet her?" Frank knelt beside Emily's wheelchair. "Of course you can, little one. Hope is very gentle and loves making new friends." Carefully, he guided Emily's hand towards Hope's muzzle. The horse remained perfectly still, her soft gaze fixed on the girl. When her fingers touched the soft fur, Emily let out a giggle of delight. "She's so soft," she exclaimed, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire place. That moment marked the true beginning of the Hope Equine Therapy Center. One by one, the children approached Hope, some riding with assistance, others simply petting her and talking to her. With each interaction, Frank, Mike, and Lisa could see the positive impact they were having. As the day progressed, Frank couldn't help but marvel at the transformation he saw, not only in the children but also in his own family. Mike, who had once been so lost and angry, now worked with patience and dedication, helping the children mount and guiding Hope with a firm but gentle hand. Lisa, always the most compassionate, moved among the parents, offering words of encouragement and explaining the long-term benefits of the therapy. Her knowledge and enthusiasm were contagious, and soon the parents were making plans for future sessions. As he watched his children work, Frank felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Mrs. Wilson's warm smile. "Frank," the elderly woman said, her eyes shining with pride, "Sarah would be so proud of you and your children. You've turned your pain into something beautiful and meaningful." Frank felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Sometimes I think Sarah somehow sent hope to us, to remind us of what's really important. Love and family," Mrs. Wilson nodded. "And the ability to heal not just ourselves but others too." As evening fell, when the last visitor had gone and the center was quiet, the Thompson family gathered in the meadow next to Hope. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. "We did it," Lisa said, her voice full of wonder and gratitude. Mike nodded, putting an arm around his sister's shoulders. "And this is just the beginning." Frank looked at his children, feeling his heart overflow with pride and love. "I'm so proud of you two, of what we've built together." Hope whinnied softly, as if in agreement. Frank approached her, stroking her neck affectionately. "And it's all thanks to you, my dear Hope. You saved us in so many ways." The family remained there, united in silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the night sky. The road ahead was full of challenges, but also of promises and possibilities. They had found their purpose, their way of honoring Sarah's memory and making the world a little better. As they returned to the house, with Hope following them quietly, Frank thought about how far they had come. From a family fractured by grief to a team united by love and a common purpose. And it had all started with an act of compassion towards an injured horse. "Tomorrow will be another day full of possibilities," Frank said, looking at his children with a smile. "Are you ready?" Mike and Lisa nodded, their faces full of determination and hope. "Together," said Mike. "As a family," added Lisa. And with those words, the Thompsons entered their house, ready to rest and prepare for the new day that awaited them. A day full of hope, healing, and the promise of a bright future. The months following the opening of the Hope Equine Therapy Center were a whirlwind of activity and emotions for the Thompson family. The center quickly became a beacon of hope for many families in Oakville and its surroundings. Each day brought new challenges, but also new rewards. One autumn morning, Frank found himself in the kitchen, preparing breakfast while mentally reviewing the day's agenda. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm biscuits filled the air, mixing with the cool breeze coming through the open window. Lisa entered the kitchen, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail and dark circles under her eyes, testimony to another night of intense study. "Good morning, Dad," she greeted, stifling a yawn as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "Good morning, sweetheart," Frank replied, noticing the tiredness on his daughter's face. "Another long night?" Lisa nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "I'm studying for the advanced certification in equine therapy. I want to be better prepared to help our patients." Frank smiled with pride. Lisa's commitment to the center and her constant desire to improve never ceased to amaze him. Mike joined them shortly after, his clothes already stained with dirt and hay. "Good morning, family. I just checked on Hope and the other horses. They're in perfect condition for today's sessions." The family ate breakfast together, discussing plans for the day and sharing anecdotes about their patients' progress. It was a morning ritual that had become sacred for the Thompsons, a moment to connect before immersing themselves in the busy day that awaited them. As they were clearing the table, the phone rang. Frank answered, his expression changing from curiosity to surprise and then to excitement. "That was Dr. Ramirez from the regional hospital," he announced after hanging up. "She wants to come visit the center. She's interested in establishing a collaboration program for her pediatric patients." The news was received with exclamations of joy. A collaboration with the hospital would mean not only more patients, but also important recognition for the work they were doing. "This is incredible, Dad," Lisa exclaimed. "Imagine how many more lives we could impact." Mike, however, seemed worried. "Do you think we're ready for something like this? We've barely been operating for a few months." Frank put a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's normal to have doubts, Mike, but look how far we've come in such a short time. I think we're more than prepared for this new challenge." With renewed energy, the family headed to the center to start the day. The morning passed as usual, with therapy sessions, horse training, and the administrative tasks that kept the center running. In the mid-afternoon, Dr. Ramirez arrived. She was a middle-aged woman with an imposing presence, but a warm smile that immediately put everyone at ease. Frank guided her through the facilities, explaining the history of the center and how each area functioned. Lisa joined them, sharing details about the different therapy programs they offered. "I'm really impressed, Doctor," Ramirez commented as she watched Mike guide a child in his session with Hope. "The love and dedication you've put into this place is evident." It was then that something unexpected happened. One of the center's newer horses, a young stallion named Thunder, was frightened by a loud noise coming from a nearby construction site. The animal began to neigh and move nervously in its stall, threatening to break down the door. Without losing a second, Mike ran towards the stall. With a firm but calm voice, he began talking to the horse, slowly approaching. Everyone watched, holding their breath, aware of the potential danger. "Easy, Thunder," Mike murmured, his voice barely audible to the others. "Everything's okay. You're safe." Little by little, Thunder began to calm down. Mike managed to get close enough to stroke his neck, whispering words of comfort. In a matter of minutes, the horse was completely calm, resting its head on Mike's shoulder. Dr. Ramirez observed the entire scene in amazement. "That was impressive," she said when Mike returned. "The connection you have with the animals is extraordinary." Mike blushed at the compliment, but Frank could see the pride in his son's eyes. "Mike has a special gift," he said, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. "We all do here, each in our own way." The visit continued without further incidents, and by the end of the day, Dr. Ramirez was more than convinced. "I'd love to establish a pilot program with you," she announced. "We'd start with a small group of patients, but if all goes well, it could expand significantly." The Thompson family could barely contain their excitement. This was the kind of opportunity they had dreamed of when they started the center. That night, after all the patients had gone and the horses were comfortable in their stalls, the family gathered on the porch of the house. The sky was dotted with stars, and a soft breeze carried the scent of night-blooming flowers. "I can't believe how much all of this has grown," Lisa reflected, her voice full of wonder. Mike nodded, his gaze lost on the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder what Mom would think of all this." Frank felt a lump form in his throat. "I think she would be immensely proud," he said softly, "of what we've built, of how we've grown as a family." There was a moment of silence. each lost in their own thoughts and memories. "You know," Frank began after a while, "when I found Hope that day, I never imagined she would lead us to this. I thought I was helping an injured animal, but in reality, Hope was saving all of us." Lisa took her father's hand, "And now we're helping others heal thanks to her." Mike joined the family embrace. "We're stronger together," he said, "as a family and as a team." As the night progressed, the Thompson family remained on the porch, sharing stories, laughing, and making plans for the future. The Equine Therapy Center had brought healing not only to their patients but also to themselves. They had found a purpose, a way to honor Sarah's memory and make a difference in the world. In the nearby stable, Hope whinnied softly, as if wanting to join the conversation. Frank smiled, thinking about how a simple act of compassion had triggered a series of events that had changed their lives forever. The future was full of promises and challenges, but the Thompsons knew that together they could face anything. With each new day, with each life they touched, they were writing a new chapter in their story, a story of love, hope, and the healing power of the connection between humans and animals. Winter had arrived in Oakville, Tennessee, bringing with it cold mornings and crystal-clear blue skies. The Hope Equine Therapy Center, far from slowing down its activity, seemed to come to new life with the season. One particularly cold morning, Frank found himself in the main stable, checking on the horses. He stopped in front of Hope's stall, lovingly observing the mare that had changed their lives. "Good morning, old friend," he murmured, stroking her muzzle. Hope had aged gracefully, her coat now sprinkled with grey, but her eyes were still as lively as ever. Lisa entered the stable, rubbing her hands together to warm them. "Dad, we have visitors. The Rodriguez family is here for their first session." Frank nodded, giving Hope one last pat before following his daughter. Outside, Mike was already greeting the family, a young couple and their daughter, a girl of about 8 in a wheelchair. "Welcome to the Hope Equine Therapy Center," Frank greeted with a warm smile. "I'm Frank Thompson, and these are my children, Lisa and Mike." The girl, Anna, looked around with big, curious eyes. "Where are the horses?" she asked in a timid voice. Mike knelt beside Anna's wheelchair. "They're in the stables, waiting to meet you. Would you like to go see them?" Anna nodded enthusiastically, and soon the family was touring the facilities. Frank couldn't help but notice the look of hope in Anna's parents' eyes, a look he had seen so many times since they opened the center. While Mike and Lisa began the therapy session with Anna, Frank stayed behind talking with the parents. "Our Anna, she was born with cerebral palsy," the mother explained, her voice laden with emotion. "The doctors told us she would probably never walk, but we refused to lose hope." Frank nodded understandingly. "Hope is powerful, and here we work with it every day." They watched in silence as Mike helped Anna mount Cinnamon, a gentle mare specially trained for children with special needs. Anna's face lit up with a radiant smile when she began to move on the animal's back. "It's amazing," Anna's father whispered. "I've never seen her so happy and relaxed." As the session continued, Frank reflected on how much the center had grown in the past year. The pilot program with the regional hospital had been a resounding success, attracting attention from local and national media. Soon, the Hope Equine Therapy Center became a model to follow, with people from all over the country and even from abroad visiting to learn from their approach. But with growth also came new challenges. Maintaining the quality of service while expanding their operations required a delicate balance. Frank often found himself awake at night, worried about financial and logistical decisions. At that moment, Lisa approached, interrupting his thoughts. "Dad, can you come for a moment? There's something I want to show you." Intrigued, Frank followed her to the office. There, Lisa showed him a letter that had just arrived. "It's from the State University," she explained excitedly. "They want to collaborate with us on a research study about the long-term benefits of equine therapy. And they've invited me to give a series of lectures about our work here." Frank felt his heart swell with pride. "Lisa, that's wonderful. I always knew you'd go far." Lisa hugged her father, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "This is all thanks to you, Dad. Your compassion for hope brought us here." As they celebrated the news, Mike entered the office, his face serious. "Dad, Lisa, I think you should come see this." The three hurried to the stables. There they found Hope lying down in her stall, breathing heavily. "I called Dr. Johnson," Mike said, his voice tense with concern. "He's on his way." The next few minutes seemed eternal. Frank knelt beside Hope, stroking her neck and murmuring words of comfort. Lisa and Mike moved nervously, preparing everything for the veterinarian's arrival. When Dr. Johnson finally arrived and examined Hope, his expression was grave. "I'm afraid it's her heart," he explained gently. "She's lived a long and full life, but her time is running out." The words fell like a weight on the Thompson family. Hope wasn't just an animal to them. She was the heart of the center, the reason they were there. "How long?" Frank began, his voice breaking. "It could be a matter of days," Dr. Johnson replied gently. "The best thing you can do now is keep her comfortable and surrounded by love." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. The news of Hope's condition spread quickly, and soon the center was filled with visitors coming to say goodbye. Patients, volunteers, even people who had only heard about the brave mare that had inspired so much good, all wanted to have the chance to thank her. Anna and her family returned, and the girl insisted on being taken to Hope. "Thank you for helping me be brave," Anna whispered, stroking the mare's muzzle. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Frank found himself alone with Hope. The mare rested peacefully, her head resting on Frank's lap. "Oh, Hope," he murmured, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. "How can I thank you for everything you've done for us? You saved us, united us, gave us a purpose." Hope slightly raised her head, her large, wise eyes fixed on Frank. At that moment, he felt a deep connection, as if he could understand exactly what the mare wanted to say. "I know," he said softly. "Your legacy will live on. We'll carry on helping others, inspiring hope. I promise you that." That night, surrounded by the family that had loved and cared for her, Hope closed her eyes for the last time. Her passing was peaceful, as if she had simply fallen asleep under the stars she so loved to observe. The next morning, as the news spread, the center filled with people coming to pay their respects. Flowers, drawings made by children, and thank you notes began to fill Hope's stable. Frank, Lisa, and Mike stood together, comforting each other and receiving support from the community they had built. In the midst of their grief, there was a feeling of gratitude and awe for all that Hope had accomplished in her life. "What do we do now?" Mike asked quietly, as the family observed the impromptu memorial that had formed. Frank looked at his children, seeing in their eyes the same determination he felt in his heart. "We carry on," he responded firmly. "We honor Hope's memory by doing what she taught us, helping, healing, inspiring." Lisa nodded, taking her father's hand. "The Hope Equine Therapy Center will keep growing. Her spirit will live on in every life we touch." As the sun set over Oakville, the Thompson family remained united, looking towards the future. Hope's legacy was more than a therapy center. It was a testament to the power of love, compassion, and hope. And they were determined to keep that flame alive, lighting the way for all those who needed to find their own hope. The sun rose over Oakville, Tennessee, bathing the town in a warm golden glow. At the Hope Equine Therapy Center, the first rays of light illuminated a new mural at the main entrance. A beautiful painting of Hope galloping free in a field of flowers, with the phrase, "Where there is love, there is hope," written in elegant cursive letters. Frank contemplated the mural with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. It had been a year since Hope's passing, and although the pain of her loss was still felt, it had transformed into something beautiful and motivating. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Lisa's voice pulled Frank from his thoughts. His daughter approached, putting an arm around his waist. "Perfect," Frank replied with a smile. "It captures her spirit exactly." Mike joined them, holding a coffee mug in each hand. He handed one to his father and another to Lisa. "Ready for the big day, sis?" he asked with a mischievous smile. Lisa took a sip of coffee, trying to calm her nerves. "As ready as I can be," she responded. "I still can't believe we're going to inaugurate the new wing of the center." The Hope Equine Therapy Center had grown significantly over the past year. The collaboration with the State University had borne unexpected fruits, attracting the attention of researchers and health professionals from around the world. The study on the long-term benefits of equine therapy, led by Lisa, had been published in prestigious medical journals, consolidating the center's reputation as a pioneer in the field. With the increase in demand and recognition, the need to expand arose. The new wing of the center, which would be inaugurated that day, included state-of-the-art research facilities, an auditorium for conferences and workshops, and additional space to house more horses and attend to more patients. "Mum would be so proud," Mike said, his voice soft but full of emotion. "Of all of us." Frank nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "She is, son. I know it in my heart." The three remained silent for a moment, each lost in their own memories and reflections. They had come a long way since those dark days after Sarah's passing, and the road hadn't always been easy. But together, they had found the strength to move forward, to heal, and to create something beautiful from their pain. The sound of arriving cars pulled them from their reverie. The first guests for the inauguration ceremony were beginning to arrive. "We'd better get ready," Frank said, taking one last look at the mural before heading towards the entrance. The morning passed in a whirlwind of activity. Local authorities, university representatives, doctors, patients, and their families all gathered to celebrate the expansion of the center. The main yard filled with laughter, animated conversations, and the occasional neigh of horses. Among the guests, Frank recognized many familiar faces. Anna, the girl who had arrived in a wheelchair a year ago, now walked with the help of a walker, her smile radiant as she petted Cinnamon. Dr. Johnson, the veterinarian who had been with them from the beginning, chatted animatedly with a group of veterinary students. Mrs. Wilson, faithful friend and unwavering support, handed out homemade cookies among the guests. When it came time for the official ceremony, Frank found himself in front of the microphone, looking at the sea of expectant faces. By his side, Lisa and Mike waited for their turn to speak. "Welcome everyone," Frank began, his voice firm despite the emotion he felt. "Just over 2 years ago, I found an injured mare in a nearby field. At that moment, I had no idea how that simple act of compassion would change our lives forever." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Hope didn't just heal physically. She healed us as a family. She reminded us of the power of love, the importance of connection, and the strength found in helping others." Lisa took the floor next, sharing the preliminary results of the research study and future plans to expand the center's reach. Her passion and knowledge shone in every word, and Frank couldn't help but feel a wave of paternal pride. When it was Mike's turn, he surprised everyone with an unexpected announcement. "As part of our ongoing commitment to the community," he said, "we're launching a scholarship program in Hope's memory. Each year we'll select 5 young people from low-income families to receive equine therapy training, completely free of charge." The news was received with a round of enthusiastic applause. Frank looked at his son with amazement and gratitude, moved by his initiative. After the speeches, it was time to cut the ribbon, officially marking the opening of the new wing. Frank, Lisa, and Mike did it together, their hands united on the scissors, symbolizing the family unity that had made all this possible. As the guests toured the new facilities, Frank found himself alone for a moment in the main stable. He stopped in front of the stall that once belonged to Hope, now occupied by a young colt named Light, born to Cinnamon just a few months earlier. "Look at what you've inspired, old friend," Frank murmured, stroking Light's muzzle. "Your spirit lives on in every corner of this place, in every life we touch." At that moment, he felt a presence beside him. Turning, he saw Anna, the girl who had arrived in a wheelchair a year ago. "Mr. Thompson," Anna said with a shy smile, "I wanted to thank you for everything." Frank knelt to be at Anna's eye level. "Oh, little one, it's you who has taught us so much about strength and perseverance." Anna looked at Light and then back at Frank. "Do you think I'll ever be able to ride like the others?" "Anna," Frank replied, his voice full of conviction, "I believe you can do anything you set your mind to. And we'll be here to support you every step of the way." The girl hugged him tightly, and Frank felt his heart fill with an indescribable warmth. This was Hope's true legacy, the ability to inspire, to heal, to give hope. When they returned to the party, Frank saw his family surrounded by friends, colleagues, and patients. Lisa was enthusiastically explaining the new programs to a group of doctors. Mike was guiding a group of children in their first interaction with the horses, his patience and gentleness evident in every gesture. At that moment, Frank knew with certainty that the future was in good hands. The Hope Equine Therapy Center would continue to grow, touching lives and sowing hope in the hearts of all who passed through its doors. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in warm hues, Frank found himself again in front of Hope's mural. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the sounds of laughter, conversations, and neighs to envelop him. "Thank you," he whispered to the wind. His message directed not only to Hope, but to Sarah, to his children, to all who had been part of this incredible journey. When he opened his eyes, he saw Lisa and Mike approaching, their faces radiant with joy and pride. "Ready for the next chapter, Dad?" Lisa asked, taking his hand. Mike put a hand on his father's shoulder. "Together," he added with a smile. Frank looked at his children, then at Hope's mural, and finally at the center they had built together, his heart filled with a peace and joy he hadn't felt in a long time. "Yes," he responded, embracing his children. "I'm ready. Together we can do anything." And so as the sun set over Oakville, the Thompson family stood united, looking towards the future with hope, love, and the certainty that, as long as they were together, any dream was possible. Hope's legacy would live on forever, not just in the center that bore her name, but in every life touched, in every smile inspired, in every heart healed. And in the heart of the Thompson family, Hope galloped free, an eternal reminder of the transformative power of love and compassion.